This is Unveiled by Helena Blavatsky. Part 4, Chapter 1b. As to practical results to be obtained by the investigations of geometry, very fortunately for students who are coming upon the stage of action, we are no longer forced to content ourselves with mere conjectures. In our own times, an American, Mr. George H. Felt of New York, who, if he continues as he has begun, may one day be recognized as the greatest geometer of the age, has been enabled by the sole help of the premises established by the ancient Egyptians to arrive at results which he will give in his own language. Firstly, says Mr. Felt, the fundamental diagram to which all science of elementary geometry, both plane and solid, is referable, to produce arithmetical systems of proportion in a geometrical manner, to identify this figure with all the remains of architecture and sculpture, in all which it has been followed in a marvelously exact manner, to determine that the Egyptians had used it as the basis of all their astronomical calculations, on which their religious symbolism was almost entirely founded, to find its traces among all the remnants of art and architecture of the Greeks, to discover its traces so strongly among the Jewish sacred records, as to prove conclusively that it was founded thereon, to find that the whole system had been discovered by the Egyptians after researches of tens of thousands of years into the laws of nature, and that it might truly be called the science of the universe. Further, it enables us to determine with precision problems in physiology heretofore only surmised, to first develop such a Masonic philosophy as showed it to be conclusively the first science and religion, as it will be the last. End quote. And we may add, furthermore, to prove by oracular demonstrations that the Egyptian sculptors and architects obtained the models for the quaint figures which adorn the facades and vestibules of their temples, not in the disordered fantasies of their own brains, but from the viewless races of the air, the invisible spirits, and other kingdoms of nature, whom, like them, claims to make visible by resort to their own chemical and Kabbalistic processes. The author Schweiger proves that the symbols of all the mythologies have a scientific foundation and substance. It is only through recent discoveries of the physical electromagnetical powers of nature that such experts in mesmerism as Enmoser, Schweiger, and Barth in Germany, Baron du Potet and Regazzoni in France and Italy, were enabled to trace with almost faultless accuracy the true relation which each theomythos bore to some one of these powers. The Idaic finger, which had such importance in the magic art of healing, means an iron finger, which is attracted and repulsed in turn by magnetic natural forces. It produced in Samothrace wonders of healing by restoring affected organs to their normal functioning conditions. Barth goes deeper than Schweger into the significations of the old myths and studies the subject from both its spiritual and physical aspects. He treats at length the Phrygian dactyls, those magicians and exorcists of sickness, and the Kabarian theurgists. He says, while we treat of the close union of the dactyls and magnetic forces, we are not necessarily confined to the magnetic stone and our views of nature, but take a glance at magnetism in its whole meaning. Then it is clear how the initiated, who call themselves dactyls, created astonishment in the people through their magic arts, working as they did, miracles of a healing nature. To this united themselves many other things, which the priestlyhood of antiquity was wont to practice, the cultivation of the land and of morals, the advancement of art and science, mysteries and secret consecrations. All of this was done by the priestly Kabarians, and wherefore not guided and supported by the mysterious spirits of nature. End quote. Schweger is of the same opinion and demonstrates that the phenomenon of ancient theurgy were produced by magnetic powers under the guidance of spirits. Despite their apparent polytheism, the ancients, those of the educated class at all events, were entirely monotheistical. And this, too, ages upon ages before the day of Moses. In the aforementioned Eber's Papyrus, this fact is shown conclusively in the following words, translated from the first 4 lines of Plate 1. Quote, I came from Heliopolis with the great ones from He-Etat, the lords of protection, the masters of eternity and salvation. I came from Sais with the mother goddesses who extended to me protection. The Lord of the universe told me how to free the gods from all murderous diseases. End quote. It is worth noting that eminent men were called gods by the ancients. The deification of mortal men and supposititious gods is no more a proof against their monotheism than the monument building of modern Christians who erect statues to their heroes, which is not a proof of their polytheism, is it? Americans of the present century would consider it absurd in their posterity 3,000 years hence to classify them as idolaters for having built statues to their god, Washington. So shrouded in mystery was the Hermetic philosophy that Volney asserted that the ancient peoples worshipped their gross material symbols as divine in themselves, whereas these were only considered as representing esoteric principles. Dupuy also, after devoting many years of study to the problem, mistook the symbolic circle and attributed their religion solely to astronomy. Eberhard and many other German writers of the last and present centuries dispose of magic more unceremoniously, and think it due to the Platonic mythos of the Timaeus. But how, without possessing a knowledge of the mysteries, was it possible for these men or any others not endowed with the finer intuition of a Champollion to discover the esoteric half of that which was concealed behind the veil of Isis from all except the adepts? The merit of Champollion as an Egyptologist none will question. He declares that everything demonstrates the ancient Egyptians to have been profoundly monotheistical. The accuracy of the writings of the mysterious Hermes Trismegistus, whose antiquity runs back into the nights of time, is corroborated by him to their minutest details. Ennemoser also says, quote, "Into Egypt and the East went Herodotus, Thales, Parimedes, Empedocles, Orpheus, and Pythagoras to instruct themselves in the natural philosophy and theology." End quote. There too Moses acquired his wisdom, and Yeshua passed the earlier years of his life in Egypt as well. Thither gathered the students of all countries before Alexandria was founded. How comes it, and Moser goes on to say, that so little has become known of these mysteries? Through so many ages and amongst so many different times and people? The answer is that it is owing to the universally strict silence of the initiated. Another cause may be found in the destruction and total loss of all the written memorials of the secret knowledge of the remotest antiquity. End quote. Numa's books, described by Livy, consisting of treatises upon natural philosophy, were found in his tomb, but they were not allowed to be made known to the public, lest they should reveal the most secret mysteries of the state religion. The Senate and the Tribune of the people determined that the books themselves should be burned, which was done in public. Magic was considered a divine science which led to a participation in the attributes of divinity itself. Says Philo Judaeus, magic unveils the operations of nature and leads to the contemplation of celestial powers. End quote. In later periods, its abuse and degeneration into sorcery made it an object of general abhorrence. We must therefore deal with it only as it was in the remote past, during those ages when every true religion was based on a knowledge of the occult powers of nature. It was not the sacerdotal class in ancient Persia that established magic, as it is commonly thought, but the Magi who derived their name from it. The Mobeds, priests of the Parsis, the ancient Gerbers are named, and, even at the present day, Magoi in the dialect of the Pelvi. Magic appeared in the world with earlier races of men. Cassian mentions a treatise, well known in the 4th and 5th centuries, which was accredited to Ham, the son of Noah, who, in his turn, was reputed to have received it from Jared, the 4th generation from Seth, the son of Adam. Moses was indebted for his knowledge to the mother of the Egyptian princess Thermuthis, who saved him from the waters of the Nile. The wife of Pharaoh, Batria, was an initiate herself, and the Jews owed to her the possession of their prophet, learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and mighty in words and deeds. Justin Martyr, giving as his authority Trogus Pompeius, shows Joseph as having acquired a great knowledge in magical arts with the high priests of Egypt. The ancients knew more concerning certain sciences than our modern savants have yet rediscovered. Reluctant as many are to confess as much, it has been acknowledged by more than one scientist. Dr. A. Todd Thompson, the editor of Occult Sciences, says, "The degree of scientific knowledge existing in an early period of society was much greater than the moderns are willing to admit. But it was confined to the temples, carefully veiled from the eyes of the people, and opposed only to the priesthood." End quote. Speaking of the Kabbalah, the learned Franz von Baader remarks that not only our salvation and wisdom, but our science itself came to us from the Jews. End quote. But why not complete the sentence and tell the reader from whom the Jews got their wisdom? Origen, who had belonged to the Alexandrian school of Platonists, declared that Moses, besides the teachings of the covenant, communicated some very important secrets from the hidden depths of the law to the 70 elders. These he enjoined them to impart only to persons whom they found worthy. Saint Jerome names the Jews of Tiberias and Lydda as the only teachers of the mystical manner of interpretation. Finally, N. Moser expresses a strong opinion that the writings of Dionysius have palpably been grounded in the Jewish Kabbalah. When we take in consideration that the Gnostics, or early Christians, were but the followers of the old Essenes under a new name, this fact is nothing to be wondered at. Professor Molitor gives the Kabbalah its just due. He says, "The age of inconsequence and shallowness, in theology as well as in sciences, is past. And since that revolutionary rationalism has left nothing behind but its own emptiness, after having destroyed everything positive, it seems now to be the time to direct our attention anew to that mysterious revelation which is the living spring whence our salvation must come. The mysteries of ancient Israel, which contain all secrets of modern Israel, would be particularly calculated to found the fabric of theology upon its deepest theosophical principles, and to gain a firm basis to all ideal sciences. It would open a new path to the obscure labyrinth of the myths, mysteries, and constitutions of primitive nations. In these traditions alone are contained the system of the schools of the prophets, which the prophet Samuel did not found, but only restored, whose end was no other than to lead the scholars to wisdom and the highest knowledge, and when they had been found worthy, to induct them into the deeper mysteries. Classed with these mysteries was magic, which was of a double nature, divine magic and evil magic, or the black arts. Each of these is again divisible into two kinds, the active and seeing. In the first, man endeavors to place himself en rapport with the world to learn hidden things. In the latter, he endeavors to gain power over spirits. In the former, to perform good and beneficial acts. In the latter, to do all kinds of diabolical and unnatural deeds. End quote. The clergy of the three most prominent Christian bodies, the Greek, Roman Catholic, and Protestant, discountenance every spiritual phenomenon manifesting itself through the so-called mediums. A very brief period indeed has elapsed since both the two latter ecclesiastical corporations burned, hanged, and otherwise murdered every helpless victim through whose organism spirits, and sometimes blind, as yet unexplained forces of nature, manifested themselves. At the head of these three churches, preeminent, stands the Roman Catholic Church, the Vatican. Her hands are scarlet with the innocent blood of countless victims shed in the name of the Moloch-like divinity at the head of her creed. She is ready and eager to begin again and again. But she is bound hand and foot by that 19th century spirit of progress and religious freedom which she reviles and blasphemes daily. The Greco-Russian Church is the most amiable and Christ-like in her primitive, simple, though blind faith. Despite the fact that there has been no practical union between the Greek and Latin churches, and that the two parted company many centuries ago, the Roman Pope seems to invariably ignore that fact. They have, in the most impudent manner possible, arrogated to themselves jurisdiction not only over the countries within the Greek communion, but also over all Protestants as well. Professor Draper says, "The Church insists that the state has no rights over anything which it declares to be within its domain, and that Protestantism, being a mere rebellion, has no rights at all, that even in Protestant communities, the Catholic bishop is the only lawful spiritual pastor." End quote. Decrees unheeded, encyclical letters unread, invitations to ecumenical councils unnoticed, excommunications laughed at, all these have seemed to make no difference. Their persistence has only been matched by their effrontery. In 1864, when the pious Pope IX excommunicated and fulminated publicly his anathemas against the Russian Emperor as schismatic, cast out from the bosom of the Holy Mother Church. Neither he nor his ancestors, nor Russia, since it was Christianized 1,000 years ago, have ever consented to join the Roman Catholics. Why not claim ecclesiastical jurisdiction over the Buddhists of Tibet? The mediumistic phenomenon have manifested themselves at all times in Russia as well as in other countries. This force ignores religious differences. It laughs at nationalities and invades, unasked, any individuality, whether of a crowned head or a poor beggar. Not even the present vice-god, Pius IX himself, could have avoided this unwelcome guest. For the last 50 years, His Holiness has been known to be subject to very extraordinary fits. Inside the Vatican, they are termed divine visions. Outside, physicians call them epilepsy. And popular rumor attributes his fits to an obsession by the ghosts of Perugia. Quote, "The lights turn blue. It is now dead midnight. Cold, fearful drops stand upon my trembling flesh. Methought the souls of all that I caused to be murdered came back to haunt me." The Prince of Hohenlohe, so famous during the first quarter of our century for his healing powers, was himself a great medium. Indeed, these phenomena and powers belong to no particular age or country. They form a portion of the psychological attributes of humanity, the microcosmos. For countless centuries have many miserable creatures been afflicted with strange disorders, which the Russian Christian clergy and the populace attribute to the possession by the devil. They throng the entrances of cathedrals without daring to trust themselves inside, lest their self-willed controlling demons might fling them on the ground. Voronezh, Kyiv, Kazan, and all cities which possess the thaumaturgical relics of canonized saints abound with such unconscious mediums. One can always find numbers of them congregating in hideous groups and hanging about the gates and porches of churches. At certain stages of the celebration of the Mass by the officiating clergy, such as the appearance of the sacraments or the beginning of the prayer and chorus, E Chehoivim, these half-maniacs, half-mediums began crowing like cocks, barking, bellowing and braying, and finally falling down in fearful convulsions outside the doors of the churches. These unclean ones cannot bear the holy prayer, is the pious explanation. Moved by pity, some charitable souls administer restoratives to the afflicted ones and distribute alms among them. Occasionally, a priest is invited to exorcise the demons, in which event he either performs the ceremony for the sake of love and charity, or the alluring prospect of silver or gold, according to his Christian impulses. But these miserable creatures, who are mediums, for they prophesy and see visions sometimes when the fit is genuine, are never molested or asked to leave the churches because of their misfortune. Why should the clergy persecute them? Or why should people hate and denounce them as damnable witches or wizards? Common sense and justice surely suggest that if they are to be punished, it is certainly not the victims who cannot help themselves, but the demon who is alleged to control their actions. The worst that happens to them is that the priest inundates him or her with holy water and causes the poor creature to catch a cold. This failing in efficacy, these people are left to the will of God to be taken care of in love and pity. Superstitious and blind as it is, a faith conducted on such principles certainly deserves some respect, and can never be offensive either to man or to the true God. Not so with that of the Roman Catholics, however, and hence it is they, and secondarily the Protestant clergy, with the exception of some foremost thinkers among them, that we purpose questioning in this work. We want to know upon what grounds they base their right to treat Hindus and Chinese spiritualists and Kabbalists the way they do, denouncing them in company with the infidels, creatures of their own making, by the way, as so many convicts sentenced to the inextinguishable fires of hell for all eternity. Far from us to be the thought of the slightest irreverence, let alone blasphemy, toward the divine, powerful Creator which called into being all things, visible and invisible. Of its majesty and boundless perfection we dare not even think. It is enough for us to know that it exists and that it is all-wise. Enough that, in common with our fellow creatures, we possess a spark of its essence. The supreme power, whom we revere, is the boundless and endless one, the grand, central, spiritual Sun, by whose attributes and the visible effects of whose inaudible will we are surrounded. The God of the ancient and the God of the modern seers. His nature can be studied only in the worlds called forth by his mighty fiat. His revelation is traced with his own finger in imperishable figures of universal harmony upon the face of the cosmos. It is the only infallible gospel we recognize. Speaking of ancient geographers, Plutarch remarks in Theusis that they crowd into the edges of their maps parts of the world which they do not know about, adding notes in the margins to the effect that beyond this lies nothing but sandy deserts full of wild beasts and unapproachable bogs. Do not our theologians and scientists do the same? While the former populate the invisible world with either angels or devils, our philosophers try to persuade their disciples that where there is no matter, there is no thing. How many of our invertebrate skeptics belong, notwithstanding their materialism, to Masonic lodges? The Brothers of the Rosy Cross, mysterious practitioners of the medieval ages, still live, but in name only. They may shed tears at the grave of their respectful master, Hiram Abif, but vainly will they search for the true locality where the sprig of myrtle was placed. The dead letters remain alone, the spirit has fled. They are like the English or German chorus of the Italian opera, who descend in the fourth act of Erani into the crypt of Charlemagne, singing their conspiracy in a tongue utterly unknown to them. So our modern knights of the Sacred Arch may descend every night if they choose through the 9 arches into the bowels of the earth. They will never discover the sacred delta of Enoch. The Sir Knights in the South Valley and those in the North Valley may try to assure themselves that enlightenment dawns upon their minds, and that as they progress in masonry to the 33rd level, the veil of superstition, despotism, and tyranny, and so on, no longer obscures the visions of their minds. But these are all empty words, so long as they neglect their mother magic and turn their backs upon her twin sister spiritualism. Verily, Sir Knights of the Orient, you may leave your stations and sit upon the floor in attitudes of grief, with your heads resting upon your hands, for you have cause to bewail and mourn your fate. Since Philippe le Bel destroyed the Knights Templars, not one has appeared to clear up your doubts, notwithstanding all claims to the contrary. Truly, you are wanderers from Jerusalem, seeking the lost treasure of the Holy Land. Have you found it? Alas, no, for the holy place is now profaned. The pillars of wisdom, strength, and beauty are destroyed. Henceforth, you must wander in darkness and travel in humility among the woods and mountains in search of the lost word. Pass on. You will never find it so long as you limit your journeys to 7 or even 7 times 7, because you are traveling in darkness. And this darkness can only be dispelled by the light of the blazing torch of truth, which alone the right descendants of Enoch, Jacob, and Moses carry. Pass on until you shall learn to multiply 333 and strike instead 666, the number of the apocalyptic beast. You may just as well observe prudence and act sub rosa, in order to demonstrate that the notions which the ancients entertained about dividing human history into cycles were not utterly devoid of a philosophical basis. We will close this chapter by introducing to the reader one of the oldest traditions of antiquity as to the evolution of our planet. At the close of each so-called great year by Aristotle, according to Censorinus, the greatest, and which consists of 6 Sars, our planet is subjected to a thorough physical revolution. The polar and equatorial climates gradually exchange places, the former moving slowly toward the line, and the tropical zone, with its exuberant vegetation and swarming animal life, replacing the forbidding wastes of the icy poles. This change of climate is necessarily attended by cataclysms, earthquakes, and other cosmic throes. As the beds of the oceans are displaced, at the end of every decimillennium, and about 1 Neros, a semi-universal deluge like the flood of Noah is brought about. This year was called Heliacal by the Greeks, but no one outside the sanctuary knew anything certain either as to its duration or particulars. The winter of this year was called the Cataclysm or the Deluge, the summer called the Ekpirosis. The popular tradition taught that at these alternate seasons the world was in turn burned and then deluged. This is what we learn at least from the astronomical fragments of the Censorinus and Seneca. So uncertain were the commentators about the length of this year that none except Herodotus and Linus, who assigned to it, the former 10,800, the latter 13,984, came anywhere near the truth. According to the claims of the Babylonian priests, corroborated by Eupolemus, the city of Babylon owes its foundation to those who were saved from the catastrophe of the deluge. They were the giants, and they built the tower, which is noticed in history as the Tower of Babel. These giants, who were great astrologers and had received, moreover, from their fathers, the so-called sons of God, every instruction pertaining to secret matters, instructed their priests in turn, and left in the temples all the records of the periodical cataclysms that they had witnessed themselves. This is how the high priests came by the knowledge of the great years. When we remember, moreover, that Plato in the Timaeus cites the old Egyptian priest rebuking Solon for his ignorance of the fact that there were several such deluges, as the great one of Ogyges, we can easily ascertain that this belief in the Heliakos was a doctrine held by the initiated priests the world over. The Neroses and the Vihaspati, or the periods called Yugas, or Kalpas, are life problems to solve. The Satya Yuga and Buddhistic cycles of chronology would make a mathematician stand aghast at the array of ciphers. The Mahakalpa embraces an untold number of periods far back in the antediluvian ages. Their system comprises a kalpa, or grand period, of 4,320,000,000 years, which they divide into 4 lesser yugas, running as follows. First, the Satya Yuga, 1,728,000 years. Second, the Tretya Yuga, 1,296,000 years. Third, the Dvapa Yuga, 864,000 years. Fourth, the Kali Yuga, 432,000 years. In total, 4,322,000 years, which makes one divine age, or Maha Yuga. Also, 71 Maha Yugas make 306,720,000 years, to which is added a Sandhi, or the time when day and night border on each other, morning and evening twilight, equal to a Satya Yuga, another 1,728,000 years. And they combine to make a Manvantara of 308,448,000 years. And 14 Manvantaras make 4,318,272,000 years, to which must be added a Sandhi to begin the Kalpa of 1,728,000 years, making the Kalpa, or grand period, of 4,320,000,000 years. As we are now only in the Kali Yuga of the 28th age of the 7th Manvantara of 308,448,000 years, we have sufficient time before us to wait before we reach even half of the time allotted to this world. These ciphers are not fanciful, but founded upon actual astronomical calculations, as has been demonstrated by Mr. S. Davis. Many a scientist, Higgins among them, notwithstanding their researches, has been utterly perplexed as to which of these is the secret cycle. Mr. Bunsen has demonstrated that the Egyptian priests who made these cyclic notations kept them always in the profoundest mystery. Perhaps their difficulty arose from the fact that the calculations of the ancients applied equally to the spiritual progress of humanity as the physical evolution of humanity. It will not be difficult to understand the close correspondence drawn by the ancients between the cycles of nature and mankind, if we keep in mind their belief in the constant and all-potent influences of the planets upon the fortunes of humanity. Higgins justly believed that the cycles of the Indian system of 432,000 is the true key of the secret cycle. But his failure in trying to decipher it was made apparent, for as it pertained to the mystery of the creation, this cycle was not the most inviolable of all. It was repeated in symbolic figures only in the Chaldean Book of Numbers, the original of which, if now extant, is certainly not to be found in libraries, as it formed one of the most ancient books of Hermes, the number of which is at present undetermined. Calculating by the secret period of the great Neros and Hindu kalpas, or yugas, some Kabbalists, mathematicians, and archaeologists who knew nothing of the secret computations above, made the numbers of 21,000 years to be 24,000 years for the length of the great year, the precession of the equinoxes, as it was to the renewal only of our globe that they thought the last period of 6,000 years applied. Higgins gives as reason for it that it was anciently thought that the equinoxes proceeded only at the rate of 2,000 years, not 2160 years per astrological sign, for thus it would allow for the length of the great year 4 times 6,000 or 24,000 years. Hence, says Higgins, might arise their immensely lengthened cycles, because it would be the same with this great year as with the common year, till it travelled round an immensely lengthened circle, when it would come to the old point again. He therefore accounts for the 24,000 years in the following manner. Quote, if the angle which the plane of the ecliptic makes with the plane of the equator had decreased gradually and regularly, as it was till very lately supposed to do, then the two planes would have coincided in about 10 ages, 6,000 years, in 10 ages, 6,000 years more. The sun would have been situated relatively to the southern hemisphere as he is now in the northern. In 10 ages of 6,000 years more, the two planes would coincide again, and in 10 ages, 6,000 years more, he would be situated as he is now, after a lapse of about 24 or 25,000 years in all. When the sun arrived at the equator, the 10 ages of 6,000 years would end, and the world would be destroyed by fire. When he arrived at the southern point, it would be destroyed by water, and thus it would be destroyed at the end of every 6,000 years, or 10 neroses. End quote. This method of calculating by the neroses, without allowing any consideration for the secrecy in which the ancient philosophers, who were exclusively of the sacerdotal order, held their knowledge, gave rise to the greatest errors. It led the Jews, as well as some of the Christian Platonists, to maintain that the world would be destroyed at the end of each 6,000 years. The historian Gale shows how firmly this belief was rooted in the Jews. It has also led modern scientists to discredit entirely the hypothesis of the ancients. It has given rise to the formation of different religious sects, which, like the Adventists of our century, are always living in the expectation of the approaching destruction of the world, Armageddon. As our planet revolves once every year around the sun, and at the same time turns once in every 24 hours upon its own axis, thus traversing minor circles within a larger one, so is the work of the smaller cyclic periods accomplished and recommenced within the great Saros. The revolution of the physical world, according to the ancient doctrine, is attended by a like revolution in the world of intellect, the spiritual evolution of the world proceeding in cycles, just like the physical one. Thus we see in history a regular alternation of ebb and flow in the tide of human progress. The great kingdoms and empires of the world, after reaching the culmination of their greatness, descend again, in accordance with the same law by which they ascended, till, having reached the lowest point, humanity reasserts itself and mounts up once more, the height of its attainment being, by this law of ascending progression cycles, somewhat higher than the point from which it had previously descended. The division of the history of mankind into Golden Age, Silver, Copper, and Iron Ages is not a fiction. We see the same thing in the literature of peoples. An age of great inspiration and unconscious productiveness is invariably followed by an age of criticism and self-consciousness. The one affords material for the analyzing and critical intellect of the other. Thus, all those great characters who tower like giants in the history of mankind, like Buddha, Siddhartha, and Jesus, in the realm of spiritual, and Alexander the Macedonian and Napoleon the Great in the realm of physical conquests, were but reflexed images of human types which had existed for tens of thousands of years before, in the preceding decimillennium, reproduced by the mysterious powers controlling the destinies of our world. There is no prominent character in all the annals of sacred or profane history whose prototype we cannot find in the half-fictitious and half-real traditions of bygone religions and mythologies. As the star, glimmering at an immeasurable distance above our heads in the boundless immensity of the sky, reflects itself in the smooth waters of a lake, so does the imagery of men of the antediluvian ages reflect itself in the periods we can embrace in any historical retrospect. As above, so below. That which has been will return again. As in heaven, so on earth. The world is always ungrateful to its great men. Florence has built a statue to Galileo, but hardly even mentions Pythagoras. The former had a ready guide in the treatises of Copernicus, who had been obliged to contend against the universally established Ptolemaic system. But neither Galileo nor modern astronomy discovered the emplacement of the planetary bodies. Thousands of years before it was taught by the sages of Middle Asia, and brought thence to Pythagoras, not as a speculation, but as a demonstrated science. Says Porphyry, the numerals of Pythagoras were hieroglyphical symbols, by means whereof he explained all ideas concerning the nature of all things. Verily then, to antiquity alone have we to look for the origin of all things. How well Mr. Hargrave Jennings expresses himself when speaking of pyramids, and how true are his words when he asks, "Is it at all reasonable to conclude, at a period when knowledge was at the highest, and when human powers were, in comparison with ours of the present time, prodigious, that all of these indomitable, scarcely believable physical effects, that such achievements as those of the Egyptians were devoted to a mistake? That the myriads of the Nile were fools laboring in the dark? And that all the magic of their great men was forgery? And that we, in despising that which we call their superstition and wasted power, are alone wise? No, there is much more in these old religions than probably in the audacity of modern denial. In the confidence of these superficial science times, and in the derision of these days without faith, it is the last degree supposed. We do not understand the old times. Thus, we see how classic practice and heathen teaching may be made to reconcile, how even the Gentile and the Hebrew, the mythological and the Christian doctrine harmonize in the general faith founded on magic. That magic is indeed possible is the moral of this book. End quote by Mr. Hargrave Jennings. Indeed, it is possible. 30 years ago, when the first rappings of Rochester awakened slumbering attention to the reality of an invisible world, when the gentle shower of knocking gradually became a torrent which overflowed the whole globe, spiritualists had to contend but against two potencies, theology and science. But the theosophists have, in addition to these, to meet the world at large, and the spiritualists first of all. Thunders the Christian preacher, "There is a personal God and there is a personal devil. Let him be anathema who dares say there isn't." Contemptuously replies the materialist, "There is no personal God except the gray matter in our brain, and there is no devil. Let him be considered thrice an idiot who says so." Meanwhile, the occultists and true philosophers heed neither of the two combatants, but keep perseveringly at their work. None of them believe in the absurd, passionate, and fickle God of superstition, but all of them believe in good and evil. Our human reason, the emanation of our finite mind, is certainly incapable of comprehending a divine intelligence in its entirety, the endlessness, an infinite entity, and, according to strict logic, that which transcends our understanding would remain thoroughly incomprehensible to our senses, cannot exist for us. Hence, it does not exist. So far, finite reason agrees with science and says there is no God. But, on the other hand, our ego, that which lives and thinks and feels independently of us in a mortal casket, does more than believe. It knows that there exists a God in nature, for the soul, an invincible artificer of all lives, in us as we live in him. No dogmatic faith or exact science is able to uproot that intuitional feeling inherent in man when he has once fully realized it in himself. Human nature is like universal nature in its abhorrence of a vacuum. It feels an intuitional yearning for a supreme power. Without a God, the cosmos would seem to the ego but like a soulless corpse. Being forbidden to search for the Holy One, where alone his traces would be found, man filled the aching void with the personal God whom his spiritual teachers built up for him from the crumbling ruins of heathen myths and hoary philosophies of old. How otherwise explain the mushroom growth of new sects and new cults and new religions, some of them absurd beyond belief? Mankind have one innate, irrepressible craving that must be satisfied in any religion that would supplant the dogmatic, undemonstrated, and undemonstrable theology of our Christian ages. This is the yearning after the proofs of immortality. As Sir Thomas Browne has expressed it, it is the heaviest stone that melancholy can throw at a man to tell him that he is at the end of his nature, or that there is no future state to come, onto which this seems progressive and otherwise made in vain." End quote. Let any religion offer itself that can supply these proofs in the shape of scientific facts, and the established system will be driven to the alternative of fortifying its dogmas with such facts, or of passing out the reverence and affection of Christendom. Many a Christian divine has been forced to acknowledge that there is no authentic source whence the assurance of a future state could have been derived by man. How could then such a belief have stood for countless ages, were it not that among all nations, whether civilized or savage, man has been allowed the demonstrative proof? Is not the very existence of such a belief an evidence that thinking philosopher and unreasoning savage have both been compelled to acknowledge the testimony of their senses? That if, in isolated instances, spectral illusion may have resulted from physical causes, on the other hand, in thousands of instances, apparitions of persons have held converse with several individuals at once, who saw and heard them collectively, with no way that all of them could have all been diseased in their minds equally. The greatest thinkers of Greece and Rome regarded such matters as demonstrated facts. They distinguished the apparitions by the names of manes, anima, and umbra. The manes descending after the decease of the individual into the underworld, the anima, or pure spirit, ascending to heaven, and the restless umbra, or earthbound spirit, hovering above its own tomb, because the attraction of matter and love of its earthly body prevailed in it and prevented its ascension to higher regions. But all such definitions must be subjected to the careful analysis of philosophy. Too many of our thinkers do not consider that the numerous changes in language, the allegorical phraseology, and evident secretiveness of old mystic writers, who were generally under an obligation never to divulge the solemn secrets of their sanctuary, might have sadly misled translators and commentators deliberately. The phrases of the medieval alchemists they read literally, and even the veiled symbology of Plato is commonly misunderstood by the modern scholar. One day they may learn to know better, and so become aware that the method of extreme necessarianism was practiced in ancient as well as in modern philosophy. That from the first ages of humanity, the fundamental truths of all that we are permitted to know on earth was in the safekeeping of the adepts of the sanctuary. That the difference in creeds and religious practice was only external, and that those guardians of the primitive divine revelation, who had solved every problem that is within the grasp of human intellect, were bound together by a universal freemasonry of science and philosophy, which formed one unbroken chain around the globe. It is for philology and psychology to find the end of that chain. If done, it would then be ascertained that, by relaxing one single loop of the old religious systems, the chain of mystery may be completely disentangled. The neglect and withholding of these proofs have driven such eminent minds as Mr. Hare and Mr. Wallace, and other men of power into the fold of modern spiritualism. At the same time, it has forced others, congenitally devoid of spiritual intuitions, into a gross materialism that figures under various names. But we see no utility in prosecuting the subject any further. For, though in the opinion of most of our contemporaries, there has been but one day of learning, in whose twilight stood the older philosophers, and whose noontide brightness is all our own, and though the testimony of scores of ancient and medieval thinkers has proved valueless to modern experimenters, as though the world dated from AD 1, and all knowledge were of recent growth, we will not lose hope or courage. The moment is more opportune than ever for the review of old philosophies. Archaeologists, philologists, astronomers, chemists, and physicists are getting nearer and nearer to the point where they will be forced to consider all the ancient wisdoms. Physical science has already reached its limits of exploration. Dogmatic theology sees the springs of its inspiration run dry. Unless we mistake the signs, the day is approaching when the world will receive the proofs that only ancient religions were in harmony with nature, and ancient science embraced all that could ever be known. Secrets long kept may eventually be revealed. Books long forgotten and arts long time lost may be brought out to light again. Papyrus and parchments of inestimable importance will turn up in the hands of men who pretend to have unrolled them from mummies or stumbled upon them in buried crypts, or tablets and pillars whose sculptured revelations will stagger theologians and confound scientists, may yet be excavated and interpreted. Who knows the possibilities of the future? An era of disenchantment and rebuilding will soon begin, nay, has already begun. The cycle has almost run its course. A new one is about to begin, and the future pages of history may contain full evidence and convey proof that, if anything can be believed in ancestry, descending spirits have conversed with humanity and told us secrets of the world unknown.